life, living and making a living can sometimes wear you out, grind you down, and dull your senses. So, for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that will give you a better chance of success and happiness, take this time out to sharpen your axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's wonderful to have you as a guest of our show today. Bern, last time we were together, we were talking about the art of closing the sale, and I know that's been a topic that's been of great interest to several of our viewers. We've had many, many calls on the topic. And we talked about several different ways. I think there were 7 techniques for closing the sale. And I loved your illustration of sometimes you have to give the shirt off your back, or in the case of your story, the socks off your feet in order to close a deal. And I was thinking about that, and I'm sure you have a wonderful group of stories, and I was hoping you could share a few more of those with us this evening.
Yeah, I think as much as anything, when you start talking about closing sales, although you have to know the technical terms for it, a lot of it is just being there and going to your parameters. I know one thing that, in my experience, I found over the years that, for example, say for example, a salesperson's parameters are way out here somewhere. Now, this is how far they could go, what they could do, the power they could exhibit, the stories they could tell, and they spend their career playing around in here. You know what I mean? In other words, they never sort of get out there to see just how far they could go because they're afraid, perhaps, of going too far, you know, of embarrassing themselves, maybe being inappropriate, but you know, you never know until you stretch yourself where that is. And quite frankly, I've done some extreme things in an effort to close the sale because I wanted those people to have the product or service. Now, you're not authorized to do any of this if you don't care, if you're there to serve yourself only. That's when you get into a high-pressure environment and people get upset with you and you're asked to leave and never come back and this kind of thing. But that's never happened to me. But if you're there and they have somewhat adopted you and allowed you to put on a dramatic presentation and what have you, it's kind of interesting how far you can go. I began to realize this in had to have been 62. I'd been in sales a few years, and I was out knocking on doors one day with Cutco Cutlery, and I got into this home, this delightful old elderly woman. She might have been in her 60s. I hate to use elderly when now I'm there too, but I mean, that's the way that goes. But I got in this home, and she was just as sweet as she could be, and I was establishing some rapport. I hadn't really started the presentation yet. And her husband came from the back of the house, and he was a grump as he sat down, and I greeted him trying to get him involved, and he wouldn't respond, and I asked him if he was retired, and he said, yeah, and I said, what from? He said, that's not important. I mean, just really wasn't with me. But he let me continue, and we managed to get everybody over to the kitchen table, and I was showing the cutlery, and he wasn't happy about my being there, or it seemed that way. And he got up, and he went into the kitchen, and he came out with a set of Carvel Hall. It's a fine cutlery line, sold retail, but it in no way compares in quality and depth with Cutco. And that's not a prejudicial statement, that's just reality. But in spite of that, he would pick out one of his knives, and he'd look along the edge and feel it with pride and, you know, lay it down very carefully in its place in its box. And then he'd pick up mine, and he'd kind of look at it and scorn, and he'd kind of flop it back into its position. You know, definitely making a difference between the two. And I'd ask him a question, he wouldn't respond. And I finally, in there, I said, Mr. Harrison, let me ask you this. Are you always this nasty? Or is it because I'm a salesperson? And he went, He kind of grunted, but she had a little smile. You know what I mean? Yeah. In other words, I sensed that maybe I had cracked the veneer. You know what I mean? Because all he did was grump. You know, he didn't say anything. Anyway, at the end of the call, I figured, well, this is not going anywhere, but I closed anyway. And I asked her what she saw that she'd like to have in her home, and we had a pair of scissors that were incredible. I mean, I could corkscrew a penny and cut silk with them. I mean, they're really awesome. They would come apart, so easy cleaning and what have you. And she did say, she said, well, if I could get anything, I would like to have a pair of those shears. And he said, more dramatically than this, darn it, and you can add your own, darn it, if you're going to buy anything here, buy it all. This is good stuff. You know what I mean? Because you don't know where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, just going out here, taking that chance, leveled the playing field in a way that I had no idea. But you know, I felt I wasn't getting anywhere anyway, so I had nothing to lose. And yet I didn't try to be nasty. I was just trying to find out if he was always that nasty or just because I was a salesman. And I always remembered that as a first step towards finding out just how far you can go if you care. So you don't have permission to do that if you're not there for their sake. I mean, I think you have to make that clear. And since then, over the years, there's been a lot of, you might remember, if I can do a quick review, in selling techniques, there are some basic methods that Charles Roth first outlined in his book, Secrets of Closing Sales. Now, I've read a lot of books since, and most of them are takeoffs on these basic assumptions. The assumptive technique, asking questions, narratives, telling good stories, impending events. Now, I don't know if we made this clear last week, but an impending event is something that bad's going to happen if you don't buy now. And something good that's going to happen if you do.
If you do.
You know what I'm saying? In other words, and so anyway, those stories come along. Inducements have always been a lot of fun for me, and then physical action, and then asking them to buy. And I came here today, this evening, this morning, with an intention to tell a story of probably the most powerful sales call I've ever seen. I mean, it just sticks in my mind as an awesome exhibition of excellence. Really? Yeah. There was 5 of us sitting at the Lone Star restaurant in Dallas, Texas. 5 stars. And these people had distinguished themselves in selling in the various arenas. And we were sitting there having breakfast after a sales meeting. Doesn't that sound like a typical salesman? You go to a sales meeting and then go have breakfast.
Right.
Anyway, we were sitting there and having breakfast and enjoying one another's company, telling war stories and what have you. And I was happening to notice this little girl walked into the restaurant, a waif. I mean, not quite clean, not too well dressed. Looks like she came from a poor environment. And she had 2 little boxes in her hand. And she came up, she kind of looked around, and she spotted our table, and she came right up to our table and stood right there, and didn't say anything. Didn't say anything, but she stood there for a minute, and then she put the boxes on the table, and then she reached and opened one and took out 2 kissy dolls. Have you ever seen little kissy dolls where they... Yeah, they kind of, I don't know what caused them to work, but they tip back and forth and occasionally will kiss one another. Well, she had a pink set, and she had a blue set, and she laid them out. And she didn't say anything, just laid them out there. And it was kind of a disconcerting moment. And I remember someone said, "Thank you, sweetheart, we're just not interested." And she didn't budge. You know, she just kind of smiled and looked at everybody. And someone else said, "We're not going to buy anything today, sweetheart. Thank you." And she didn't budge. Didn't say anything, but didn't leave. And she kind of looked at us and just stood there. And pretty soon I heard someone saying, "How much are they?" You know what I mean? And she said $1. And was quiet for a while, no communication. And then pretty soon someone said, "Well, I'll go ahead and take one." And so we handed her $1, and she said, "Thank you." And she left the other sitting there, didn't move. And someone else bought that one. You know what I'm saying? And then she said, "Thank you," and she left. Well, it wasn't too terribly long. She came back in, and she had 3 boxes with her. And she came right back to our table again and laid them out. You know, and you know, of course, that she sold everybody a pair of kissy dolls. I mean, just darling. And then she left and came back in with more. And as she walked in, the manager said, sweetheart, you can't do that in here. And we said, oh, yes, she can. She did it to us. You know what I mean? And I don't know how many set of Kissy dolls she sold. But what I'm saying is she was just there. You know what I mean? And she was adoptable. I mean, you know, and she didn't take the no for an answer, so to speak. But we didn't say no. We said, you know, we weren't going to buy anything today, and we didn't need one, and that type of thing. See what I'm saying? She was waiting for a no, and we didn't say that. And can you see what I'm saying, though? Because she was there, she cared, and she had a product that somehow we found a need for. We'd give it to our grandkid or our child or give it to somebody else and what have you. But she made a sale, and I thought that was pretty powerful. It was so darling, too, when you stop and think about it. Now, what kind of technique is that? Physical action, certainly. You know, she was doing things that we had to stop her from doing to keep from buying. You know, she took them out of the box, she laid them out there, she acknowledged us. I mean, I would say that was a good physical action close. One of the most fascinating physical action things that I've ever done, I saw it happen one time, was, you might even think about doing this on occasion. You've been in these sales calls where it was right there. You know what I mean? You swore there was going to be a sale, but there wasn't. And you did everything you could, and you gave all the inducements, but there was no action. Oftentimes what I've done is to pack up everything. I would just, you know, thank them for their time and courtesy, hope I haven't taken too much of either one, and begin to say my goodbyes, and pack up all my stuff, and actually go to the doorknob and say my goodbyes, okay, just like I was leaving, and I would leave. And I would go on out to the car, and open the trunk and put all my stuff in it and slam the trunk down, you know, like I normally would. And I'd get in and start the engine and pull out, you know what I mean? And I'd stop, screech the brakes, put the car in reverse, back up, park, get out of the car, slam the door, get up, open the trunk, take out my stuff again, my samples, slam the trunk in an appropriate way, and walk back up to the house again, okay? And I'd knock on the door, and they would open it, and I'd say, hi, I'm sorry, I forgot something. You have just another moment, you know? And they say, well, yeah, come on in, because I'm still there. You know what I mean? When you've been there for an hour or so, when you leave, the essence of you is still there. There's also, oftentimes, some positive conversation going on. You know, like, he really did a good job, that was a nice product, maybe sometime we ought to get it. I would like to have had a set like that, whatever it is. But there you are again, see? And so I would go back in, unpack, and say, did I tell you? And then I would give them another reason to buy. And it's incredible what a high percentage of people at that time will say, okay, you can go ahead and write it up. But it's it's just amazing because
there's
sort of a
physical action close as well, or what would you?
Pardon?
Is that also a physical?
I would
action
think so.
close?
Yeah, physical action certainly in a form of narrative. I think narratives, of course, are the most fun. One of my favorites to get people to think. See, as a salesperson and as a closer, the idea is to get people to think. And if indeed this product can serve them well now and in the future, can edify, elevate, and enhance their life, then we've got a responsibility to do the best job we can. Okay. In fact, remind me of the big call, the big sale in a minute. I want to make an analogy here. But one of the things I've used in the past is what I call a stadium close. I've been in homes where, again, everything was there. You know, they were prospects. Capacity to buy, authority, ability to make a decision, and a perceived need for the product or service. And I'd made my call, and it was not moving forward effectively. And what I would do, oftentimes, I'd say, look, I think I understand. We've been talking about this. We've been cocooned here, not paying much attention to what was going on around us, certainly. And you know how we can do that when we're communicating.
Yes.
We do that here occasionally. We forget
Right.
there's a camera,
Right.
and our time slips by us, and we go, oh, gosh. But anyway, this is what's happening. I'd say, look, let's take a moment and use our imagination. Let me turn on this light switch. And I just kind of reach over there and do that. And I say, all of a sudden, we realize that we're sitting in an auditorium, like right down at the center of Arco Arena or the Reunion Tower or whatever we happen to be in the country. And we're sitting right there down at the center court, if you would, and there's thousands of people who've watched this presentation. Thousands of people. There are people, say half of the people, saw the presentation themselves and took advantage of the product or service. Okay? And there's another half of the audience who saw the presentation and didn't take advantage of the service. Okay? And they've been watching all this evening. And I say, now all these people are here, they've heard what you said, They saw my presentation and your response. Okay? Now, if this was the circumstance, what would that be like? What would that be like? Now, just think for a moment. I'm certain that someone in the audience would say, you better do it. You better do it. I didn't, and I was sorry afterwards. Someone else was going to say, hey, why don't you go ahead and get it? I mean, we got it. We've been delighted ever since. And someone else would say something, and someone else, and pretty soon a din would rise, okay? And pretty soon there would be some applause and ovation. What do you think you'd do under those circumstances? And I've had people say, yeah, you're right. You know, and they move on.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Now, taken out of...
Call that the peer pressure approach.
You could, I suppose. But really what it is, it's making them aware that, hey, this is an appropriate thing to do. Now, if you don't feel strongly enough about your product to go ahead and develop these things, then maybe you're selling the wrong product. You know, there has to be,
you have to be emotionally involved.
Something that makes your heart throb and you that blood run quick, you know, and just and put tears in your eyes and a choke in your throat sometimes over the product itself. And I don't think I've ever sold anything that couldn't do that for me occasionally.
Well, it seems like every decision we make is an emotional decision at some level or another. And when we use logic, it's just to support our emotional reason for buying the product, right?
I tell you, if we're going to be in sales, we got to get serious. Got to get serious. A moment ago, I mentioned the big call. Remember we talked about the big call?
Yes, the big call.
Can you imagine what it would be like? Say, for example, you're in a process of sales, and the company says, Gina, if you can sell 10 prospects in a row without a miss, okay, 10 prospects in a row without a miss, we have a contest for you. We're going to get you the car that you want and replace it, okay, every 2 years. We're going to give you 4 wardrobes, okay, per year for the next 5 years. And as every season comes in, you can go out and shop to your heart's content. We're going to put you in a new home and furnish it, give you a trip around the world. We're going to, you know what I mean, on and on. This ultimate, this is it.
The ultimate package.
Now, this is the contest, and you just came out of your 9th call and sale in a row.
And you're almost there.
Yeah. Now, this is the 10th call, the big one. What's that going to be like for you? How carefully are you going to prospect? How carefully are you going to correlate your product and service to that person? Okay. How far will you go? That's appropriate and within the bounds of good judgment and reason and ethics and what have you. How far are you going to go? How powerful are you going to be? How many stories are you going to tell? I mean, what techniques are you going to employ in order to get that sale? I mean, you're going to put out all the stops, right?
Right.
And my contention is that every prospect deserves that of you. Now, as every sales call, if you're selling a worthwhile product, every sales call deserves that kind of attention, that kind of intensity, that kind of fever and fervor and commitment. And then you're going to be a great salesperson.
There's something you said that really caught my attention, Bern, and that was how carefully do you correlate your product or service with your potential customer? I think that a lot of times we're wasting our time and energy, not to mention the prospect's time and energy, by not asking the questions of ourselves and of them up front to find out if there's a need or a reason that they may want to buy the product.
Exactly. I think a lot of it, remember we could go back to the original qualifying or correlating information of capacity. A lot of sales calls are put on when the capacity is not there to buy. And frankly, no one dares to ask because they don't want to mess up the call too soon. They want to kind of, a lot of people sell like flipping a coin and hoping it's going to land on edge.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'll make the call, I'll do my best job, and hopefully they'll buy. That's not professional salesmanship. Right. And that's what gets a lot of people into trouble and in fact burns people out of the industry. I know one of the best salesperson I ever had call on me. 1955, I'll never forget him. He was awesome. I mean, really, really good at what he was doing. And the last time I saw him, he was driving a Coke truck, making a living for his family. As he burnt himself out, calling on everybody, showing everybody, closing everybody. Yeah, no, I think there's a prospecting process where you determine capacity, authority, and ability, and a perceived need for the product. Then, I'll tell you, here's some of the things that I kind of look for. Will the people relegate or delegate their authority to you? Because will they accept your authority about this issue? I think that's terribly important. Because if they're not taking you seriously, if they're flippant and kind of, you know, evasive in their answers and posturing, you haven't correlated very well. There's no adoption that's taken place. I think that's terribly important. I think, too, that there has to be a sense of communication, and I think you have to adopt them. You know, I think, I mean, it takes a little while for them to adopt you, perhaps, but you remember we talked about the adoptive process,
right.
where if they will adopt you. Now, in order to get that adoption to take place, sometimes you have to talk about family. I know, for example, I think one of the strongest closes I have ever used is being super conscious of pets. Have we talked about that?
I don't think we have.
Oh, if I get a referral, for example, I mean, referrals are always strong. If I get a referral from someone, I say, well, do those folks have pets? And they say, well, yeah, they have a dog. And I say, what's the dog's name? You know, how long they had the dog, you know, this kind of thing. Or if they got a cat, I'll find the cat's name. Anything at all I can find out about pets. Can you imagine, do you have a dog at home?
I have a cat.
A cat. What's
Yeah.
the cat's name?
Cosmo.
Cosmo, okay. Say, for example, I was referred to you from someone, and I'm in your home making a call, and Cosmo, chances are, is going to check me out.
Oh, absolutely.
That's their job, you know?
Right.
So Cosmo is going to come around, run up against my leg, and if I, out of the blue, reach down and say, hi, Cosmo, how's it going? Huh? Have I made an impression or what? How did he know that cat's name? Well, I didn't tell him that cat's name. I mean, he took the trouble to find out the cat's name and is familiar with the cat. Okay?
Right.
Have I made any progress?
Right, absolutely.
Yes,
Right.
I know I have, no question. I have seen salespeople go on calls and ignore the presence of children. I mean, you can't do that. You know what I mean? In other words, you have to embrace everyone that your purchasers care about and
Absolutely.
everything that they care about.
Absolutely. I think you can offend the purchaser more than you should
Oh.
have than offending their children.
Exa-
That's,
oh,
because
yeah,
there's that
exactly.
protective feeling
Exactly.
there, and the same with pets.
You bet.
Not that you would ever want to offend anyone,
Right.
but I have been on the purchasing end, and I've noticed your children crowd around. They ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're silly questions, and they maybe touch something or
Right.
whatever, and that's difficult sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
salespeople to maintain their professionalism,
Right.
and they're afraid something's going to get knocked over, they're going to forget what they were saying or lose their place.
I'll tell you how nice people are. I'll tell you a story. This is awesome. Years and years ago, I knew an encyclopedia salesman who swears this happened to him. He, selling encyclopedia, he had an appointment with his family and arrived on time. And he knocked on the door, and they opened the door, and he identified himself, and they said, oh yeah, come on in. And as he was moving forward, he picked up his sample kit, and as he moved forward, this German Shepherd kind of, boom, you know, kind of brushed up against him and moved on into the house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they get inside, and the dog was kind of boisterous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he wasn't a, you know, socialized dog. And anyway, he had his stuff all laid out, and, you know, you have to spend money on that stuff.
Right.
And the dog was getting in it and scratching around his case and all that, and finally he kind of lost his patience. And he said, he started to pack up, and he said, look, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, he says, but these samples are important to me, and I really can't afford to replace them frequently, and I mean, your dog just, you know, it's just too much trouble. And they said, our dog? We thought that was your dog.
And they'd been putting up with this dog in their house the whole time.
They've been putting up with this dog the whole time. Isn't that sweet? Our dog, we thought it was your
Oh,
dog.
that's amazing. Well, and I was going to say that often if you'll take the time and the energy to make those children a part of what you're doing, or those pets, people appreciate that so much.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a warmth that flows from you through the children or the pets.
Exactly.
to
So
the
they all have to be embraced.
prospects,
That's the main.
absolutely.
But all of that has to do with correlation. That's getting into the environment, adopting it, and becoming part. One of the most proud sales calls I have in my life was a cookware call in Dallas, Texas, over on Oak Cliff. If anyone knows that part of town, they'll know what I'm talking about. And it was a garage apartment in back of this real beautiful home. And I got in there, I guess, probably 10 o'clock in the morning. And a delightful young couple with a little baby. And after an hour and a half, I had gotten on the list. They were list keepers. List keepers are tough because they have, you know, they have a prioritized list, the order they want to get things and what have you. And they actually put me on the list, and they felt they had really given me consideration.
Right, right.
And I thought, gee, number 10?
5 years from now, yeah.
This is going to be a long time.
Right.
And so then I started selling, okay? Now, viewers are going to say, no, that would never happen in my house, and I'm sure that's true. But that was an 8.5-hour sales call.
You're kidding.
Yeah, an hour and a half, they were ready to put me on the list, and in 8.5 hours, they were wrapping it up. And during that time, I totally adopted that family. In other words, I took them out grocery shopping that day, and I bought some chuck roast, the cheapest cuts of meat you can imagine. I bought some other vegetables and what have you. I came home, I cooked their dinner in this cookware that I was selling. I served them at their table. I changed the baby's diaper so they didn't have to get away from the table. I mean, I did it all, okay? And after it was all through, I cleaned up, polished the pans, they looked brand new. I mean, I did it all that day. And finally, they bought. I mean, I kept moving up the list. They said, well, gee, you're number 3, you know? And I knew I was going all the way. But the thing of it is, sure, I wanted the sale. I mean, but much more importantly, I wanted her to have that cookware so she could make her own baby food. I wanted her not to have to worry about stirring and basting and burning food. You know what I mean? I wanted them to have all the nutrition from the food they were buying. I wanted them to be, it was all the benefits of the product that I wanted them to have. Now, that's a major investment, just, you know, one sale, one couple all day. But the thing of it is, they knew more about that product than most of my salespeople. You know what I mean? No, they were educated, and they became advocates. They probably sold me in a neighborhood of maybe 12 or 15 sets of cookware.
Oh, you're kidding.
Because they had dinner parties. They would invite friends over for dinner, and I'd go in and cook the dinner and serve it. And so I really fared well out of making that commitment to them. Now, at no time did they ask me to leave. At no time did I feel that I should. I mean, they couldn't get over the commitment that I was making. But the thing of it is, it did result in the sale. And that's kind of, remember, the salesperson that doesn't close sales is not a salesperson, they're what? Conversationalist.
Right.
You know, they're out there entertaining people, being real nice, and walking away from business that could otherwise have been well served. I don't know if I mentioned it last week or not, but I learned the lesson early in my career. I'd put on this sales call and had been talked out of it. You know, this lady said she just couldn't manage it right now. And you know, I was selling cutlery at the time, and I left. And coming home that night, she lived right downstairs from me. And coming home that night, it was about 10:30, I heard the vacuum cleaner running. And I thought, gee, it's late to have a vacuum cleaner running. Went upstairs and found out the next day that she'd bought a vacuum cleaner for cash and told my wife she'd much rather have had the cutlery, okay? And I figured that's never going to happen again. When I walk away, they know that I've been there. Gina, our time is about up, and we don't want to take this on too long. Got a lot of information on closing. Next time we're together, by the way, I think I'm going to venture forward into probably the most powerful selling technique I've ever found, called the 3 favors. And meanwhile, I want to thank everybody for listening and watching, and know that this is 800-661-3490. That's 800-661-3490, and my name is Bern and
Moses.
And thank you, Gina Fitt.
Thank you, Bern.
Okay.